Today described as high-functioning autism, drawing on modern understandings of neurodiversity. Dr. Loveless will explain these characteristics and discuss how they may have influenced Jackson during the critical week of the war. Dr. Loveless last addressed the camp on July 2025. On that occasion, he analyzed the personality traits of several prominent generals while providing a sweeping overview of the entire Eastern Theater. His return promises another engaging and insightful presentation. Please welcome Dr. Loveless.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you for having me back. And let's be a little informal this time. So if anybody has any comments, questions during the talk, feel free to just pop up. I'll see if I can answer them. The title of the talk is Jackson was Jackson. And what I try to do is explain Jackson's actions during the 7 days battle. And I usually begin by asking a question. I ask how many people have heard the story of the 7 days, that Jackson wasn't himself. If he had been his usual highly effective self, Lee could have taken the entire Union Army. And the reason why Jackson wasn't himself was he was just exhausted. And maybe a quarter or a third of the people raise their hands, and then I tell them, oh, that's completely wrong. And to understand Jackson, you need to appreciate that he was what would typically now be called a high-functioning autistic. And there's a saying that if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, because they can be very, very different from each other. And that was particularly the case with Jackson. So I'll go through a little bit of background information for autism. I'll go through Jackson's characteristics, then I'll try to explain what I think actually happened during the 7 days battle with him. There's one diagnostic system that describes autism as a spectrum, but for practical purposes, people are placed in 3 levels. People in level 3 are often called profoundly affected. There's one group of kids in this group, and it's been found to have low folate levels in their brain because it affected transport proteins in their blood-brain barrier. The folate just doesn't get into their brains. They can show a variety of different neurologic signs before they're 3 years old, and the diagnosis is made with a spinal tap. And there's a drug called leucovorin that's a reduced form of folate. They can use a different transport system to get into the brain, and there have been reports of effective treatments for this group of kids with this drug. Other children in this group can have severe language problems. They can have severe intellectual problems. And it's not very likely they're going to be able to live in any kind of independent life. The ones in level 1 are often called high functioning, and their primary problem is with social interactions. And they've been found to have a deficit, what's called theory of mind. Theory of mind is when you have some idea what someone else is thinking. And there's a fairly straightforward test that's used to determine when kids develop this. One puppet comes into a room and puts a tray of fruit on a table, and that puppet goes out of the room. Another puppet comes into the room and puts a tray of fruit into a refrigerator, and that puppet goes out of the room. Then they ask the subject where the first puppet will think the tray of fruit is when the first puppet comes back into the room. Children from the age of 5 and 6 up will typically say the first puppet will think the tray of fruit is on the table, because they know the first puppet doesn't know the second puppet put it into a refrigerator. Children 4 and younger and autistics will typically say they think the tray of fruit is in the refrigerator. It's because it just doesn't occur to them that someone else can think something else than what they're thinking. There's one individual from this group who went into diplomacy, and he described his subjective experience this way. He said, in diplomacy, you're dealing with people who speak a variety of different languages, coming from a variety of different cultures. So the rules of diplomatic interchange are very firmly set. And it was easy for him to learn those rules. He said what he found exhausting was just ordinary social interactions, because he had to try to consciously pick up on facial and verbal cues that people were giving him. There's another diagnostic system that was called the ICD-10, and that divided autism into 3 groups. There was childhood autism, atypical autism, and Asperger's. And there's a fairly rough correlation between these 3 groups at levels 3, 2, and 1. This system was replaced in 2022 with the ICD-11, and they got rid of these 3 subgroups. But for practical purposes of describing Jackson, I think it's best to think of Asperger's as a really distinct group of individuals. Then there's a rather special group that included Newton, Einstein, Marie Curie, and their characteristics were that they were able to deal with a great deal of complexity, they were very rapid at problem solving, they could focus intensely on a particular subject, they were very loyal and very honest, often brutally honest. And Jackson had characteristics of the first group of Asperger's, he had characteristics of the second group, including Newton and Einstein, and he had some characteristics that were just completely unique to him. And he showed his problems with social interactions mainly in two places, at VMI and during the war. From a teaching point of view, Jackson was probably the worst faculty member in the history of VMI. His lectures would just paraphrase the readings. When a student asked a question, he would just back up to that part of the lecture and just repeat that part of the lecture. There were no analogies, there was no breaking a problem down to smaller problems, there was no approaching a problem from a different point of view, and the students rebelled against this type of teaching. They would draw funny pictures on the board, they would throw spitballs in the class, they would truss up one of their classmates in a chair, lean it against the door. Then when Jackson opened the door, the chair and the classmate would go spreading across the table. They would rig the linchpin on the cannon that he used for demonstration, so the cannon would fall apart. He would go running down the hill after the wheel went down the hill. One student tried to drop a brick on his head one time, and Jackson took no notice of this at all. During the war, he was known for not telling anyone his thinking, and this wasn't for any sort of secrecy purpose. When he didn't do something, people knew he did something. He just never told them why he didn't. And it just never occurred to him that someone else might think something that he thought. If he knew why he wasn't doing something, he thought they should think the same thing at all. He could also have poor relationships with some subordinates. At VMI one time, the superintendent saw what happened with the cannon demonstration falling apart. He told Jackson to put the cadet officers on report for allowing disorderly behavior, and he took it out on the superintendent. At 5 minutes to 5 on a Friday afternoon, he would go in, salute, put his report down, salute again, and just walk out. He did something similar to Jefferson Davis during the war. Early on in the Valley campaign, he was attacking Romney to get Kelly out of the area, and he left Loring's brigade there. This was in a winter campaign in January, and the men suffered severely from cold, frost. The accommodations in Romney were very poor, and they continued to suffer from cold, and a lot of the men were ill and sick. Loring was apparently a terrible manager. Letters went from the men there to Richmond about the problems. All the officers in 2 out of the 3 regiments signed a petition to be sent someplace else. A colonel who was going on furlough met with the Vice President Alexander Stephens and Jefferson Davis in Richmond, all these problems. So the War Department ordered Jackson to send his men to some other place with better accommodations. He wrote back and said, "I've carried out your orders, and with this interference, I can't do any good, so I'm resigning my position." Now at this point, Richmond realized how much problems they were going to be in when something like this hit the newspapers. He had to route his paperwork through Joe Johnson. Johnson held paperwork until people could work on him, so Lee, Bottliger, and other people worked on him and got Jackson to undo his resignation. But during the early lead up to the 7 days, Lee was going to introduce Jackson to Jefferson Davis. Jackson just stood upright, gave a salute, and that was it. So he basically was going to have anything to do with Jefferson Davis. Then after the 7 days, Lee wanted to reorganize his army to have 2 infantry corps, one under Longstreet, the other one under Jackson. Davis pretty rapidly accepted Longstreet, but Lee had to do a lot of talking to get Jefferson Davis to accept Jackson as one of Lee's corps commanders. He also got to have terrible relationships with subordinates, especially A.P. Hill. On the way to Cedar Mountain, they changed the order of march. A.P. Hill didn't get the order in time, and his division got in back of the wrong division. And when Jackson heard about this, he told Hill what happened. He wasn't going to listen to Hill's explanations of why it happened. He just thought he knew where Hill should be, so he thought Hill should be where he should be. Jackson also showed his ability to handle complexity at VMI as well as in the war as well too. After the Mexican-American War, Jackson got a position of DMI on the faculty, teaching what they called natural philosophy, and he called physics. He was actually one of the few people in the country qualified to teach that course. When he got into West Point, he was considered one of the immortals, which meant he was at the bottom of his class. And that's because his education had been pretty spotty before that. But between native ability and hard work, he graduated 17th out of a class of 57, put him in at least the top third of the class. And his best course was physics. He was one of the best physics major that came out that year. He also showed his ability to handle complexity during the war too. The Valley Campaign is considered one of the premier examples of maneuver during war. His strategic goal was to create as much havoc as possible, to hold down as many Union forces going after him so that they wouldn't be able to link up with McClellan's force attacking Richmond. So early on, he attacked Kernsville with a force that was half the size of the one he was attacking. The Union forces couldn't believe that someone with that small of a force would attack such a large force. So they had men from McDowell's force shed through the valley to try to get a hold of him. Later on, he headed to McDowell, where Milroy was at, a part of Fremont's force. He added his force with Allegheny's Johnson. And Lincoln had this idea of sending some force to Knoxville because Eastern Tennessee was very Unionist. And he did this in order to head Fremont off from going to Knoxville. Later on, he linked up with the Ewell's division, and they attacked Front Royal to bypass the Union force at Strasburg, and they attacked Winchester again, and this was to divert more forces. Lincoln had the idea of having Fremont come from the west, and Shields' division once again come from the east to try to trap Jackson. When he was in Kernstown, his dispositions might not have been the best, but he managed to get out of the trap. And out of the entire 5-month period of the Valley Campaign, that's the only time he was just completely not up to snuff. Jackson also had his own particular sleep pattern. He could sleep in very small periods, and there are just a number of stories of when he just fell asleep. One time a cavalry captain was giving a report, and he fell asleep, so the cavalry captain stopped talking. Jackson woke up again and said, "Proceed." The cavalry captain started talking again, then he fell asleep. Another time he was on the platform of the convocation of Davidson College. He fell asleep there. Another time he's walking on the saddle of Little Sorrel, said an easy walk. He fell asleep there. Another time he just got off his horse, planted himself for 5 minutes on the ground, took a brief snooze, got up again, and just rode off again. And even though he was highly religious, he routinely fell asleep in church. So Jackson's brain could just decide that there was nothing in particular going on at any point in time, and it was just time to take a brief snooze. But during the Valley Campaign, he went an entire week getting less than 3 hours sleep a night. One night he might not have gotten any sleep at all, and he still functioned at a very high level. So the idea that he was exhausted during the 7 days just really doesn't fly. Someone's basic physiology just doesn't change within a 6 to 8 week period of time. He was, let's see, what else I want to say? And even though he was highly religious, that wasn't too unusual back then, but he took it to the point that he made the Reverend Robert Dabney his chief of staff. He wanted Dabney for his preaching abilities, but he didn't have a chaplain spot open. So he made Dabney his chief of staff. And even though when Dabney said he didn't have any military experience, Jackson said, "Oh, you'll learn." And Dabney wasn't a particular problem during the Valley Campaign, because Jackson pretty much functioned as his own chief of staff. He worked directly with his map maker Hotchkiss and his quartermaster Harmon, and he basically made out his own orders for his subordinates, so he could just pretty much do his own chief of staff work. He really didn't need someone to do anything more than some minor administrative activities. But during the 7 days, that was a different story, and Dabney proved to be some of the problem, a source of his problems during the 7 days. So now I'll try to go over what happened during the 7 days. The lead up begins when John Singleton Mosey found out that McClellan only had cavalry pickets going over to his supply base at White House on Pamunkey. So he told Stewart told Lee, and Lee sent Stewart on an intelligence gathering mission. And Lee was particularly interested in what was happening with McClellan's right. After Stewart came back riding around the Union Army, he told Lee that McClellan's right was up in the air. What that meant was that it wasn't protected by any natural obstacle and was open to a flank attack, which is what Lee decided to do. Lee wanted Jackson at a spot that it could block a movement. His plan was predicated on the idea that McClellan would have to retreat north to his supply base on the Pamunkey, and he wanted Jackson at a spot that would block that movement. So he ordered Jackson to bring his force from the valley. At this point, he had about 17,000 men. And while he was partially there, he ordered Jackson to come to a meeting where he would explain his plan of campaign. Jackson didn't like traveling on the Sabbath, so at 1 minute after midnight on a Monday morning, Jackson took off for a 54-mile ride to Lee's headquarters. And he left Dabney in charge of moving the men. Dabney just couldn't deal with things like train schedules and stuff like that. Harmon, the quartermaster, had to sort of fill in, and this is why Jackson's force was late getting to the area. Lee's General Order 75 on telling Jackson how to get to the spot made sense to someone like Lee, who was very familiar with the area. It might as well have been Greek to Jackson, who didn't know the area at all. At one point, he got confused between Cold Harbor and Old Cold Harbor, and he wound up at a spot 3 miles from where Lee wanted him at. And Lee's order never ordered him to attack. Lee intended Jackson to cooperate with A.P. Hill, and Branch commanded a brigade in A.P.'s Hill division, and Branch was supposed to communicate between the two. Branch didn't have any military experience. He never said anything to Hill. Hill eventually got so frustrated that he started attacking Fitzjohn Porter's position on his own. Lee took a brigade from D.H. Hill's division and attacked Porter's left flank without any effect. Longstreet later joined in, also with no effect. But this whole confused situation actually wound up working out. It was about 4 a.m. in the morning, McClellan learned that Jackson was on Porter's flank and possibly attack him. So he ordered Porter to back up to Gaines Mills. This time Lee talked directly to Jackson and told him what he wanted. Jackson again got confused between Cold Harbor and Old Cold Harbor. He went down the wrong road. He had to completely turn around and get back out. So he was a couple hours late getting to Gaines Mills. Eventually he got there and Lee got the coordinated attack that he wanted. And the breakthrough happened when the division commander of the men in Hood's brigade told his men not to stop and fire, but just to keep on charging. So they're able to break through Porter's position. So he had to retreat south of the Chickahominy River. After he retreated, he destroyed the bridges that went over, and Jackson needed 2 bridges to get over. He rapidly rebuilt the Grapevine Bridge, but he put Dabney in charge of rebuilding the Alexander Bridge further up the river. Dabney couldn't handle doing it, so Jackson had to put someone else in charge of building that bridge. And after he finally got over, Stewart showed Jackson an order that had been signed by Lee's chief of staff, Chilton, that Jackson should cooperate with Stewart on preventing people from crossing the river. And so when Magruder asked Jackson for some cooperation, Jackson said he had something important to do, and there had to be some level of confusion in Lee's headquarters, because Lee told Magruder that he had ordered Jackson to cooperate with Magruder. So this is why there was no real battle at Savage Station. Lee's next idea was to have Longstreet and A.P. Hill go behind Magruder and Holmes, and to swing east at Glendale, attack McClellan's force at Glendale. McClellan actually wasn't there for that battle. He was taking a ride on a gunboat, the Galena, on the river, I guess to look for a spot for his men to finally land. So when Jackson got to White Oak Swamp, the bridge was out. Mumford told him that he couldn't rebuild the bridge because the Union cannon on the opposite side. So he told Wade Hampton to go look for another spot to build a bridge. Hampton came back and told him he found the spot. So Jackson told Hampton to build a bridge. Then Hampton came back, told him he'd build a bridge. that could take infantry but not artillery. Jackson then sat on a stump of a tree thinking. Then he got up and took a nap underneath a tree. If you know Jackson's behavior, he obviously thought trying to cross that bridge was a bad idea for several possible reasons. He might have thought the Union cannon would decimate his force while it was crossing. He might have thought it might have been attacked while it was only partially over and not ready for battle. Or he might have thought that sending infantry without artillery was just a bad idea in general. And it was probably a prudent decision that he didn't, because Franklin's entire corps was on the other side of that swamp, and Jackson's men would have headed right into that. He probably didn't know that, but he obviously knew there was some substantial Union force over there. So it's a rather prudent decision not to go over. So this is where the whole controversy, most of the controversy is out of Jackson's actions, where he was supposed to be exhausted. He was exhausted. He just thought it was time to take a nap when there wasn't anything much to do. So that's pretty much it. North and South has an article coming out in their next issue about this. So if you want to read the whole article, that's pretty much it.
What symptoms of autism were at play in that White Oak Swamp situation?
Well, one was Jackson never told anyone his thinking. So he never told Wade Hampton why he didn't try to cross. So an ordinary person, typical person, if you told someone to build a bridge and you decide not to go over it, you're going to tell them why you decided not to go over it. Jackson never told why he wasn't doing it. So that leaves a lot of possibilities for people to come up with all kinds of different reasons why someone didn't do something. It was mainly Jackson's problems with social interactions. He just never told anyone his thinking. And it wasn't because of any secrecy purpose. Wade Hampton knew he didn't try to cross the bridge. He just didn't think Wade Hampton would think anything different than he thought. If he thought Union cannon could decimate his force, he probably thought Wade Hampton could think the same thing. If he thought Union force could decimate his men while they were partially over and not ready for battle, he probably thought Wade Hampton should think the same thing. If he didn't think sending infantry without artillery was a good idea, he probably think Wade Hampton should think the same thing. It just never occurs to someone like that someone else can think something different than they're thinking. So he didn't think he needed to explain anything.
And so that gets, so there's certainly a consistency in his career of not explaining anything, just like as an educator. He just had to back up and read the same lecture again.
He couldn't understand why the students weren't getting the thing.
Approaching something from an alternative route was not something in his thought process.
Yeah, he couldn't understand why a student couldn't understand the lectures, couldn't understand the concept, because he understood it. He thought the student should be able to understand it, so he just couldn't understand the confusion and give any sort of analogy or anything else that might explain and break down the problem so the student could understand it. During the Valley Campaign, Lee sent Ewell's division to Jackson, and Jackson just let him sit on the east side of the Blue Ridge, and he went off and he's doing his thing with Milroy at McDowell. And Ewell was telling people, I think Jackson's crazy. Do you think Jackson's crazy? I'm sure he's crazy. And then eventually Jackson picks up Ewell, and then it became obvious to Ewell what Jackson was doing and why he was doing it. But before, Jackson never said anything to Ewell about why he was doing anything. It wasn't for any secrecy purpose. He just never thought he should tell anyone anything.
Did any of the subordinates like Ewell ever figure out how to read Jackson?
Ewell pretty much just waited until Jackson's going to tell him what to do, and just rely on the fact that Jackson pretty much knew what he was doing. People like A.P. Hill, he has a rather prickly personality, and so he and Jackson never got along together. There were other people that Jackson wanted to court-martial. I don't know how many people actually tried to court-martial. He tried to court-martial Loring, and Lee promoted Loring to Major General and sent him someplace else to get away from Jackson.
Well, that's why he ended up at Vicksburg or Champions Hill. Wasn't he out there?
Loring?
Yeah.
I don't remember. Pemberton was there, but I don't remember Loring.
Well, Lauren was one of the division commanders
Oh, okay.
under Pemberton, I think.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But I know that name from the Western Theater in there. Is that right, Keith? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Western Theater is where they send people that they didn't want in the East.
Right.
So,
And ones that had Yankee parents.
yeah, who else did they send there? Let's see. Oh, Beauregard. Jefferson Davis had a terrible relationship with Beauregard, probably even worse than with Joe Johnson. So he sent Beauregard out to Albert Sidney Johnson. And Beauregard wound up taking over at Shiloh after Johnson got killed. And he was in, he was at Corinth. Then when,
Yes, because he still was in charge after Johnson.
yeah. And then when Halleck was headed towards Corinth, Beauregard didn't think he could do anything, so he just evacuated the city, and that got another black mark in Jefferson Davis's book.
But he eventually brought him back to Petersburg.
Yeah, he was there. He dealt with the Army of the James. He got the Army of the James bottled up on that's what
Bermuda
Bermuda
100.
yeah. And he was there when Grant crossed south of the James, and he sent Baldy Smith to attack. And between Baldy Smith being too cautious, Beauregard's defense being too good, Grant didn't get through the line of Petersburg until Lee got there. Grant had set a ruse that made Lee think he was going to attack north of the James again. They went south of the James, and Lee was rather mad when he found out at when Grant had snuffed him on.
Yeah, quite the maneuver. Okay, that's it.
Thank you very much, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me again.
Well, thank you very much. And you say, what issue is the article going to be in?
The next one,
In the next one?
next one, north and south.
Okay, all right.
It's probably one of the few journals that's still being printed on the Civil War. I think Civil War Times ended and the war
Really?
ended.
I hadn't realized that.
So on behalf of the camp,
Thank you.
please, everybody give Mr. Loveless another round of applause.
We have a new mug if you'd like.
Oh, okay.
And on behalf of the camp, you let us
Thank you.
know whether you like that one or not.
All right, actually, is that the new one or is that the old one?
I think that's the new one.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I don't remember the one I brought him a hole in it for the coffee to go in.
Well, then maybe the old, I don't know.
No, that's the new one.
Okay.
That's the new one.
Thank you very much. Thank you, folks.
Okay.
Hope you enjoyed it.
Well, we did, and hopefully Doug Crenshaw will enjoy it when I send him a copy of it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sir.
Thank you for having me.